It's 5:05 and welcome into a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We've got a pair of education bills working their way through the North Carolina General Assembly. We're going to give you an update on this morning. Republican lawmakers in the North Carolina Senate are advancing a bill that would ban the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda in the state's public higher education institutions. The latest move aligns with a broader conservative effort to dismantle DEI initiatives in public institutions across the state. Supporters of Senate Bill 558 argue that DEI programs create division, stifle individual thought, and place identity politics above academic merits. According to Senator Brad Overcash, the Republican from Gaston County, during a meeting of the Senate Higher Education Committee earlier this week, he said, quote, "Rather than focusing on academic excellence, critical thinking, and the free exchange of ideas, these discriminatory practices have divided our campuses, our students, and our faculty." Pretty strong comments there from Senator Overcash. Under the measure, public colleges and universities would be required to eliminate offices and staff dedicated to DEI initiatives. The bill prohibits promoting diverse concepts, such as the idea of systemic racism or moral culpability based on race or gender. Institutions would be barred from requiring staff, faculty, or students to affirm any DEI-based beliefs. Additionally, Senate Bill 558 would eliminate processes for reporting incidents based on an offensive or unwanted speech. Similar legislation has been on the move in the General Assembly in recent weeks as well. House Bill 171 would bar state agencies from promoting, supporting, funding, or maintaining DEI programs, which would include hiring, staffing, or training. And at the same time, Senate Bill 227 aims to remove DEI offices, staff, and divisive concepts from grade schools, K through 12 public education, ensuring education focuses on core curriculum without promoting ideologies deemed inconsistent with equality. Opponents of Senate Bill 558, including Senator Theodos of Mecklenburg County, the Democrat there, worries that its language is overly vague, leaving room for problematic implementation. Critics also argue that banning DEI programs could stifle academic freedom and limit the ability of institutions to promote diversity. Raylan Collins of the ACLU of North Carolina raised concerns that the bill would harm student recruitment and lead to a chilling effect on the university curriculum. She said, quote, "Institutions of higher education must remain places where academic freedom thrives. Censoring disfavorable viewpoint undermines the very foundation of intellectual exploration." That's Senate Bill 558. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Another piece of legislation that we are tracking this morning, working its way forward in the GA, would require at least 3 hours of instruction in American history or governance in order to graduate from a University of North Carolina institution or a community college. This time we turn our attention to the House and House Bill 7, which is the North Carolina REACH Act, and it cleared the North Carolina House Higher Education Committee on Wednesday. Under the bill, college students must take a course providing a comprehensive overview of major events and turning points in American history and government, including the reading of our foundational documents like the U.S. Constitution and Declaration of Independence. The bill would become effective with the 26-27 academic calendar. Representative Keith Kidwell, the Republican out of Beaufort County, said, quote, "The outcome obviously is to have it where our children and young folks come out of school with a better level of knowledge and understanding of who America is." Kidwell emphasized that the bill only applies to 4- or 2-year degree programs and not certificates or certifications that are offered through the community college system. Gina Robinson, the president of the James G. Center for Academic Renewal, spoke in favor of the bill during the committee meeting. Robinson pointed to data from a 2019 survey by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni revealing widespread ignorance of civics amongst college graduates. 70% of those college graduates misidentified Thomas Jefferson as a founding father of the Constitution. 39% incorrectly believed that the president can declare war, and 16% thought that former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia was a current justice of the Supreme Court. She said during the comments during the committee meeting, quote, "Preparing students for civic life should be a cornerstone of university education. I'm heartened that the North Carolina General Assembly is now considering the REACH Act, which will include some of the Martin Center's essential recommendations on civic education. I applaud the REACH Act's inclusion of this of completion in the primary documents, as well as its well-constructed enforcement mechanism." Some Democrats, however, on the committee voiced skepticism with the bill. Representative James Robertson out of Wake County said, quote, "I think we are going down a slippery slope when we add this unnecessary barrier to our students. Perhaps this would be fine for the school system, but I think we need to keep in mind what our community colleges do and what they contribute to our local economy." We'll continue to track both pieces of these legislation, House Bill 7, Senate Bill 557, as they make their way, 558 rather, as they make their way through the North Carolina General Assembly. We've got details this morning on CarolinaJournal.com, and of course, keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:11, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. The word tariff has been used a lot over the last couple of days. A major announcement from President Donald Trump on Wednesday. To get some additional details on that this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome the Senior Vice President of Research over at the John Locke Foundation, Brian Balfour, to the Carolina Journal News Hour this morning. Brian, major discussions out of Washington, D.C. Walk us through as you saw Trump's announcement on Wednesday and give us your thoughts on what's going on here.
Yeah, so basically what I saw is he's applying 10% tariffs across the board, across the nation, against all imports coming into the U.S., and then dozens and dozens of other countries that he has targeted for much more significant tariffs. And his selling point is to try to, push back against countries that have, quote unquote, been ripping us off, is kind of the way he puts it. But really, these are just protectionist measures to try to protect domestic manufacturers against competition. And what tariffs really boil down to are taxes on American consumers wishing to purchase imports. It's going to make the end result is likely going to make a lot of products much more expensive. And on net, the likely result will be an overall loss of jobs because so many other industries are going to be hurt because of the benefits going to the protected industries by these tariffs.
You know, I'm glad you bring up some of the other situations that can be affected, right? You talk about manufacturing things in the United States. That's a big push for President Trump. But most of these goods that go into manufacturing, Brian, have to be imported into the United States one way or the other. We don't have the ability to produce an unlimited amount of resources here. I mean, you look at rare earth and those minerals, we just don't have them in the United States. So irregardless of whether we're putting the device or putting whatever product together here in the U.S., there's still going to be some significant increases on some of those input goods into the supply chain.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point too. The auto industry is a great example. Trump's talked a lot about that, but so I've seen some reports where up to 60% of the inputs and parts going into finishing an automobile in American manufacturing plants are inputs from foreign countries. So what that does then is that, of course, that significantly increases the cost of production for these U.S. manufacturers, which is then, now those companies are confronted with two choices. Either they try to pass the cost on to consumers, which means much higher prices for cars. And Trump actually kind of was dismissive about that concern. A few days ago, he made some comments. He's like, "Oh, I know cars are going to be more expensive, but I don't care. Just they're going to be made in America, and that's all that counts." Basically, is what he was saying. So either the price of cars are going to go up, or if the consumers can't afford the increased prices of the cars, then these companies are going to have to find other ways to cut back on costs to offset the higher input prices. And the biggest other expense, of course, is labor. So the cutbacks are going to be borne by workers. So it's really putting companies in a very tough spot, especially when you think again about the rising price of the inputs. That's going to happen by putting these tariffs on international imported goods.
You know, the whole discussion here, of course, is buying American, which I think most people would be in favor of buying products in America or products that are made in America. But Brian, we have that option right now, yet most people, myself included, maybe you, we shop on Amazon, we go to the big box stores, we buy the cheapest Chinese crap that we can because it's cheap and it's easy to use and relatively affordable. There are American alternatives right now, but American consumers, rightfully so, go towards those cheaper products.
Yeah, absolutely right. And especially, it's interesting after the last few years of the Biden administration, right? People were calling out the inflation that people were struggling with during the Biden administration. People recognized that a lack of access to affordable goods because the prices were rising so much, it's bad. It's bad for American economy. It's bad for consumers. It's particularly bad for low-income households. And so the same concept is going to apply here to the tariffs. It's going to make most of the stuff that we buy more expensive, and that hurts consumers. And so either consumers are going to have to cut back on what they're buying, which then that decreases demand for these American-made products, and decreased demand, of course, is going to harm the sales of these companies, which is going to cause these companies to cut back in the end, anyways. Or people spend more on cars and other goods, and that means they have less money left over to spend on other things in their local economy, like restaurants or even clothes shopping or furniture shopping, what have you. And those industries are harmed, and those people will lose their jobs. Those Americans working in those industries will lose those jobs. So on net, it's typically going to come out as a net negative, even for the American worker.
We'll continue the conversation with Brian Balfour of the John Locke Foundation coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:17, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at your Friday morning commute. A look at the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
We're headed back to Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts on Wednesday, April the 16th from 7 to 9 p.m. for WBT's News and Brews. And of course, we'd love to see you there. All of your WBT friends will be in attendance to raise a glass with you and talk about the news and issues of the day. It's WBT's News and Brews, Wednesday, April the 16th at Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts. Visit WBT.com this morning for tickets and event details. It's now 5:22 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. U.S. Senator Tom Tillis has sent a letter to the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, urging her to work with Congress to expedite the distribution of more than $23 billion that was allocated in January to assist ranchers, farmers, and rural Americans who suffered from natural disasters in both 2023 and 2024. The letter, it reads in part, quote, "These funds will benefit producers in every state. The natural disasters that struck farmers and ranchers in 2023 and 2024 affected a wide range of crops, livestock, and on-farm infrastructure. In North Carolina, Hurricane Helene is estimated to have caused almost $5 billion in agricultural losses, and in New Hampshire, a disastrous freeze in 2023 damaged apple and peach trees as well as other crops, with growers seeing as high as a 100% crop loss for the year." We'll get into some more details of that letter with Katie Zehnder from the Carolina Journal coming up here in just a few minutes. It's now 5:24. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Continuing our discussion on tariffs this morning, the Senior Vice President of Research over at the John Locke Foundation, Brian Balfour, joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Brian, it's interesting as this discussion has taken place over the last couple of weeks, a lot of uncertainty all ahead of Wednesday when the big announcement was made. For the president's credit, however, he has been very consistent in this. You go back and look at his books from 30 years ago, Art of the Deal, and some interviews that he did in the 80s and 90s. He's been beating this drum on tariffs and the disadvantage in the trade war that the United States has been dealing with for quite some time. While folks might not agree with it, I guess it's something to say the consistency is there.
Right. Yeah, the consistency with him is there. However, there does create a lot of uncertainty in the markets, however, because now we don't know, is Congress going to take some action to try to take away these tariffs or do something different with these tariffs? What happens in a few years when Trump is no longer in office? There's a different administration in the White House. What are they going to do with these tariffs? And that kind of uncertainty just absolutely is poison for the economy. It's poison. It makes it impossible for entrepreneurs and businesses to plan and try to make any plans for the future and expand and bring on more workers, because this great uncertainty. They just don't know, like we talked about, the price of their inputs. They don't know what that's going to look like. They don't know what sort of competition they're going to be facing from foreign inputs. And so that uncertainty is just devastating. We've seen how the stock market has reacted in the first day. Uncertainty obviously is poison for the stock market as well as the economy. So, very interesting to see just kind of how this plays out over time.
Brian, would you analyze what we learned from the president in the 10% flat rate in about 50 or 60 countries with some different rates depending on what their current imports are, whatever formula the White House is using? Would you analyze that from a free market standpoint of open trade across the world?
Yeah, well, it's obviously completely antithetical to free market principles. It's almost like kind of trying to micromanage the economy, right? He's applying different tariffs rates for different countries, which basically how it impacts the consumer is that there's going to be different price changes for different products. And it kind of smacks a little bit, quite honestly, of some central planning here. I mean, the president is trying to orchestrate all these tariff and trade wars to try to reimagine the U.S. economy and make it more based with manufacturing jobs, more kind of hearkening back to the 1930s and 40s and 50s maybe. And that's, it's not the government's job. It's not the president's job to try to orchestrate what the U.S. economy should look like based on government policy. And so I think it's just really intrusive into the economy and ultimately is completely antithetical to free market and free trade tenets.
What do you make of the president's claims that we're being taken advantage of in this free trade environment where we're supposed to be sending products and goods and services back and forth in this open world economy? What do you make of the president's comments that we are being taken advantage of as a country? He used his charts on Wednesday to show the different percentages and countries that do in fact have very high import tariffs on United States goods. Is there any stock in what he's saying at all?
Well, I mean, if other countries want to punish themselves with high tariffs, then let them. The U.S. shouldn't respond in kind and shoot ourselves in the foot as well. That just doesn't make much sense. And also, there's a comparison I'd like to draw. The U.S. government, it imposes trade embargoes on companies and regimes that we don't like, right? Like Cuba and Iran and Syria. And so what embargoes do, embargoes prevent foreign goods from being imported into those countries. And so the U.S. government, on one hand, is using that as punishment to other countries, but then they're also imposing that on ourselves, trying to keep foreign goods out of our country and saying it's going to make us rich. So it's it's kind of hard to reconcile the two really conflicting messages there.
Brian, final question for you this morning. We've seen the uncertainty in the market. We've seen some uncertainty in the announcements from the president himself. What kind of time frame do you think we're looking at? Of course, American consumers were very frustrated with the last administration and rising prices. How long do you think it is before we start seeing some of the impacts of these tariffs, which are slated to go into effect this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're starting to see it already. The stock market is typically pretty forward-looking, so there's a lot of jitters there. We're seeing, we're already starting to see some announcements of companies starting to lay people off here in the U.S. There's some other announcements that foreign companies are in making investments in the U.S. Some are attributing that to the changes and the dynamics of the tariffs. So at least on a small scale, we're already starting to see some impacts. There has been some warnings too, with regards to specifically said that the farmers of the U.S. and how they may be certainly negatively impacted. We saw in the first Trump administration when he was imposing tariffs that there was a $23 billion bailout to U.S. farmers because of the negative impacts of those tariffs back in Trump's first administration. The USDA has already announced that they're prepared to do more taxpayer bailouts for farmers because they anticipate negative financial consequences for U.S. farmers. So, a lot of things are already starting to shape up. It's in at least a small scale, but it's hard to put a specific time on. I think things will happen probably pretty rapidly in terms of like other countries and how they'll respond. Over the next few weeks, I think we'll start to get a clearer picture about where this is going to go. Are other countries going to start to back down, or are they going to escalate? And, we'll see what happens from there.
It's some great analysis this morning. Brian Balfour from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:30, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at traffic on your Friday morning. An update with the great Boomer Von Cannon.
No, I'm not so sure about that, Nick. No, sir, but...
For News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT, the executive director of the USS Battleship North Carolina is being accused of illegally recording conversations, falsifying timesheets, and retaliating against his assistant director, Chris Vargo, according to a new lawsuit. The Battleship North Carolina has been moored in the Cape Fear River across from downtown Wilmington since 1961. Originally slated for scrapping by the U.S. Navy, the ship was preserved thanks to the 1960 Save Our Ship campaign, which took place across the state. That campaign successfully relocated the ship to downtown Wilmington, where it sits today. It now operates as a 7-day-a-week interactive museum under the North Carolina Department of Nature and Cultural Resources. Chris Vargo, a 22-year veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard, spent 12 years working for the battleship before his termination in January of this year. He names the Battleship Commission Executive Director Jay Martin and the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources in a new lawsuit. Vargo is seeking more than $25,000 in damages, reinstatement of his former position, and removal of Martin as the executive director. The 18-page lawsuit claims that Vargo was fired on January the 24th for reporting Martin's alleged misconduct and asserts violations of federal whistleblower protection acts. According to the complaint, Vargo says that Martin unlawfully planted a recording device in the conference room to capture conversations between himself and contractors as it related to the battleship's Living with Water project, which is aimed to address tidal flooding in the parking lot in violation of both state and federal wiretapping laws. Martin sought to make Vargo a scapegoat for the project delays and budget overrun the suit contends, even though Vargo did not have any authority to prevent them. On several occasions in the summer of 2024, Martin reported to Chris Vargo that he was working 60 to 70 hours per week and instructed him to enter that time accordingly, reads the suit. Yet during those weeks, Martin was not on site at the battleship, and no one working at the battleship knew where he was or what he was doing. At the time, Martin, the executive director, was a professor at Central Michigan University, teaching nearly full-time, with the lawsuit alleging that Martin wasn't even in Wilmington when claiming that 60 to 70 hours per week of overtime pay. Attorney Jonathan Marks of Chalmers, Adams, Backer, and Kaufman PLLC, who represents Vargo, stated in a press release that individuals should be able to voice concerns without the fear of retaliation. The attorney, Jonathan Marks, said, quote, "Mr. Vargo did the right thing by speaking up about what he witnessed at the battleship. His termination threatens to chill other employees from speaking up if they see something wrong and raises questions about the Battleship Commission's commitment to compliance, integrity, and accountability." The lawsuit also alleges that the Battleship Commission, which hired Martin in 2024, intentionally sought out non-military leadership for the job at the battleship, despite the job posting requiring it. Reading from the suit, on information and belief, certain commission members, most notably Vice Chairman Marcia Morgan, was determined to lessen, if not purge, military influence from the battleship's management. Morgan believed correctly that the former senior military officers were likely to push back on the commission's ideas when they were misguided. This suit was filed in the New Hanover County Superior Court on April the 1st, so back just a couple of days ago. A very interesting story about the Battleship North Carolina and some of its leadership. We'll continue to track details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour and, of course, on our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:41. We continue to track disaster relief as it relates to the big business of agriculture across the state of North Carolina. To get some details in a letter sent from U.S. Senator Tom Tillis, Katie Zehnder, carolinajournal.com, joins us this morning on the News Hour. Katie, you've got an article up this morning over at carolinajournal.com surrounding U.S. Senator Tom Tillis. So walk us through those details this morning.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Nick. Thank you for having me on. So, last Thursday, Senator Tom Tillis, in partnership with U.S. Senator Jeanine Shaheen, who's a Democrat from New Hampshire, sent a letter to the newly confirmed Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, and they were urging her to work with Congress to expedite the distribution of funds that was passed back in December to assist farmers, ranchers, and other rural Americans who have really suffered from natural disasters that took place in 2023 and 2024. You know, we've got Hurricane Helene and all of those natural disasters that took place in that time span. So they're really pushing for the expedited distribution of those funds. The funds come under the American Relief Act, which was passed in December, H.R. 10545. And so in the letter, the senators say these funds will benefit the producers in every state. The natural disasters that struck farms and ranches in 2003 and 2024 affected a wide range of crops, livestock, and on-farm infrastructure, wrote the senators in the letter to Secretary Rollins.
I guess it's probably a valid question to ask, Katie. Is there a specific reason as to why these funds have not been doled out yet? Obviously, there was an administration change that took place in early January. Did that have anything to do with this, or is this just another example of maybe some government inefficiencies and how long it really takes to get money rolling out of Washington, D.C.?
Right, Nick. We don't have any specific details, but I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of the, changeover into the new administration, but it's also, the red tape and kind of the slow roll that we see up in Washington, D.C. And this is not the first time that a letter like this has been sent to Secretary Rollins. A very similar bipartisan letter was sent to her back on March 10th, and it was sent, it was signed by Senator Tom Tillis, Senator Ted Budd, and a number of, pretty much the entire Republican caucus here in North Carolina, Chuck Edwards, Virginia Fox, Greg Murphy, pretty much the whole, Republican caucus here in the state, as well as several other U.S. lawmakers not from North Carolina. So they're really putting the pressure on Secretary Rollins to get this money out and distributed.
And Katie, you and I have talked about this in the past over the last 6 or 8 months. I mean, agriculture is a major business in North Carolina. Not only major, it is the largest business in the state as a whole. The western half of the state, many areas completely, literally wiped off the map with the devastation from Hurricane Helene. These farmers, Katie, especially the smaller family-owned farms, they don't have money in the bank account. They don't have big-time reserves that they can draw down to get things up and rolling. They're in desperate need of this money.
That's exactly right, Nick. It's the number one industry here in North Carolina. Agriculture contributes $111 billion annually to the economy. So, these farmers, they're really hurting, and they've lost a lot of their crops, 2023 and 2024. Some of them lost like up to 50% of their crop or more, I believe. So they're really hurting, and they really need this money to kind of get back on their feet and kind of get distribution, up and running again, so they can, and it's really going to have a trickle-down effect on our economy if they don't get these funds.
Now, this kind of goes well with the story we covered earlier this week on the Carolina Journal News Hour. The state agricultural commissioner and Steve Troxler announced some funding that is going to be helping farmers that were directly impacted by Hurricane Helene. What are some of those details?
Right. So on Tuesday, Commissioner Steve Troxler of the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services announced that applications are now open for the Crop Loss Disaster Program, which comes under HB 47, which is the Disaster Relief Part 1, Disaster Recovery Act of 2025, Part 1, that the General Assembly passed earlier this month. I believe it was passed on March 19th, I believe, and then Governor Stein signed it into law shortly after. But that bill exceeds $524 million in disaster relief funding, and over $300 million of that was specifically allocated for farmers relief. So those applications are now open for farmers to go and apply for, disaster relief for those who have experienced crop loss or any kind of, verifiable losses from disasters such as Hurricane Helene, Tropical Storm Debbie, or any of those, natural disasters that we saw in 2024.
I guess it's good to know, even though things are a little bit slower than many folks would want up in Washington, D.C., the silver lining in all of that is that North Carolina lawmakers, including the Agriculture Commissioner and members of the General Assembly, as well as Governor Josh Stein, see the importance of the agriculture industry across North Carolina. Katie, where can folks go read and get details on the two different stories we're talking about this morning?
Right. As always, they can read both stories in full and read all the quotes and everything at carolinajournal.com.
Katie Zehnder joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 547, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon. WBT and Tommy D Productions presents George Norrie Live, Saturday, April the 19th from 5 to 8 p.m. at the Booth Playhouse in Charlotte. The legendary George Norrie from Coast to Coast AM will lead an interactive evening featuring special guests Vincent Jania, Samantha Fay, and Danian Brinkley. The show will include questions and answers from George and his guests, alongside a salute to our country's military veterans and first responders, and George will even sing a few songs from a live band. To top it off, Bo Thompson and Pete Callender will be there to say hello. It's all presented in part locally by Monica the Medium at the Healing Tree Boutique, who will also be on site offering readings for a special price. It's George Norrie Live, Saturday, April the 19th at the Booth Playhouse. Visit WBT.com for tickets and details this morning. It's now 5:54. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Keeping an eye on some news across the General Assembly this morning, two different pieces of legislation as it relates to education funding. Republican lawmakers in the North Carolina Senate are advancing a bill that would ban diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas in the state's public higher education institutions. That would be both four-year colleges and community colleges that are part of the UNC or community college system. This move, of course, aligning with broader efforts at the national level to dismantle DEI initiatives in public institutions. Supporters of Senate Bill 558 argue that DEI programs create division, stifle individual thought, and place identity politics above academic merits. Senator Brad Overcash from Gaston County said during a meeting earlier this week, quote, "Rather than focusing on academic excellence, critical thinking, and the free exchange of ideas, these discriminatory practices have divided our campuses, our students, and our faculty." Under the measure, public colleges and universities would be required to eliminate offices and staff dedicated to DEI initiatives. The bill prohibits promoting divisive concepts such as the idea of systematic racism or moral culpability based on gender or race. Institutions would be barred from requiring faculty, staff, or students to affirm any DEI-based beliefs. Additionally, Senate Bill 558 would eliminate the process for reporting incidents described as offensive or unwanted speech. That legislation continues to make its way through the North Carolina General Assembly. We'll continue to track details. In the House, we're tracking House Bill 7. That's the North Carolina REACH Act. That cleared the North Carolina House Higher Education Committee on Wednesday. Under this legislation, college students must take a course providing a comprehensive overview of major events and turning points in American history and government, including the reading of the founding documents like the United States Constitution and Declaration of Independence. The bill would become effective beginning with the 26-27 academic year. Representative Keith Kidwell, the Republican out of Beaufort County, said, quote, "The outcome obviously is to have it where our children and young folks come out of school with a better level of knowledge and understanding of who America is." Kidwell emphasized that this bill only applies to 4 or 2-year degree programs and would not affect any sort of certificates or certification programs within the community college system. You can read more details on both of those stories by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, this morning. That's going to do it for a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you Monday morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.